My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and you are listening to Commotion. I want to switch gears right now and talk about one of the most beloved Canadian indie bands around. Take a listen to this. That is Cause Equals Time by Broken Social Scene. Look, I've always been fascinated by Broken Social Scene and the concept of Broken Social Scene because for about 25 years, the whole identity of the band has been that they're always in flux. Sometimes it's 6 musicians. Sometimes it's 19. Some of the folks in the band are in other bands. Some of them are in bands with each other. But the core idea here is that this is a group of friends. They enjoy making music together. They drift in and out. Sometimes they drift apart, kind of like friends do. There's a new documentary that just premiered in Toronto. It's All Gonna Break. It's Stephen Chung's first movie. Tabassum Siddiqui has seen it, and she's here to talk about it before it gets a wider release on Crave. Tabassum, hello, friend.
Hello, how are you?
It's so nice to have you here. How's it going?
Thank you. You're really good, thanks.
Listen, I want to ask you, maybe you should start with this. What is your own relationship with Broken Social Scene?
Yeah, so similar to where the film lands and goes way, way back to the early days, that's where I first met them too. So many people know Broken Social Scene as sort of this multi-headed beast.
Yeah.
Well, I know one of those people from a very long time, and that was singer Leslie Feist.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, it's a great story. I was interning for Network Records, which is kind of a very formative Vancouver-based indie label, and her band By Divine Right, which she was in with another Broken Stage member, Brendan Canning, was just sort of taking off at that time. And, we were around the same age. We were just starting our careers, and she, started pulling me in and saying, oh, well, come see this band, or I know these people. And it was a real kind of formative scene building at that time. And so, once I got to know her, anyone who would know me at that time, I was either pressing a Leslie Feist CD into your hand or dragging you to one of her shows. And likewise, she was that person doing it for everybody else. So once she started working with the Broken Social Scene folks, that became its own nexus in Toronto. So venues that they would play in, or some of the promoters that they were involved with, we all got sort of very much in on the ground level, and then it all sort of went from there.
Okay, what I like about this is that the two things. One, just casual flex, you and your personal close friend Feist. Don't worry about it, not at all.
Shout out, hey Les.
Yeah, totally chill. But then the other thing is the thing that happens when people try to explain Broken Social Scene. They go like, well, you gotta understand. It's like you start drawing a map of
Absolutely.
Like who knows who. And in that sense, actually, like it ends up being very personal relationships with the band, which is unlike not dissimilar from the movie. So you want to talk a little bit about this documentary, because as much as it's a movie that documents the band's origin points, it is also a documentary documenting Stephen Chung's relationship with the band. Why is this such a personal project for him, you think?
Oh, absolutely. Well, similar to myself and so many other people who got to know all the various members of the band back then, he started off as being friends with the 3 sort of founding members of the band. So that would be Brendan Canning and Kevin Drew and Charles Spearin. And they were just immersed in music in the city at the time. It was such a lively, rich time for all sorts of music. And they were going out to raves or underground parties together, and just like he was in on the ground floor of what was happening for them, but also experiencing his own sort of birth into that music scene. And so he began just following them as they became Broken Social Scene, and just took a camera everywhere. So as he likes to put it, where everybody there was picking up an instrument, he said, I don't play anything, but I've got my camera. That's what I do here in this band. So he would just be hiding corners in the studio. He would be out at a show with all his cameras and just filming things. And so he amassed thousands and thousands of hours of footage over especially those first formative, almost a decade of Broken Social Scene. And at one point decided he really, really wanted to make a film. Well, I mean, why wouldn't you, having this great,
all that footage,
beautiful footage? And so in around 2007, 2008, he presented a rough cut to the band, and they were not quite ready to put it out.
In 2007, 2008? That was a little while ago,
exactly.
I think.
And, for them, they were just hitting their stride and really becoming that sort of breakout act years later, that after they first started. But really, touring all over the world and just experiencing that success that bands really crave. And they just didn't feel like it was quite the right time or maybe even the right film. And he was crushed. Here's their friend who really just wanted to
Spent all the
capture the
time.
scene
Yeah.
and spent his own time and money and everything else. But, he looks back now and here it is 20 years later and his film is finally coming out.
Yeah.
And he really looks at it as this is actually the best time it could have come out because now we're looking back.
Yeah. I love that idea of looking back. When you were watching this documentary, Tabassum, what did you learn about the band watching it through Steven's lens that maybe you didn't see or didn't know before?
Yeah, it's so interesting to me because on one hand, we have a parallel experience in that we were there at sort of the same time.
Yeah.
But it really is about his experience. Like one of the things that makes this film come to life, I think, is that they instead of just sort of a hodgepodge of that older footage and a very nostalgic lens, he's looking at it through, well, here's my little worldview, like eye on what was happening at the time. And I think what I got out of it, having, known this crew for so long and really covered them as a journalist and feeling like I knew maybe a little bit of everything around them, I think what really struck out for me was this idea that the success that they eventually amassed was so unexpected to them. It really wasn't a very calculated thing in the way that, there are plenty of bands who they set out and they're just like, we really want to make it. We want to play stadiums. We want to do this. We want to sell millions of records. Yeah. This was not what this group was about. It was really about a bunch of friends who were coming together at a really interesting time in a city's life, in the creative sense of their own bonds together as friends and as musicians. And I think what you really get a sense of from Steven's film is just that joy of creating that they had together and the fact that it actually ended up being something that went around the world and that listeners everywhere of all ages, no matter what language you speak, that something about it resonated with them is pretty amazing.
I gotta say, that's something that stuck out for me as I was watching this documentary is that it really felt, first of all, I really was interested in the city as it was represented in that period of time because it felt possible not for you to pursue the dream of being a stadium selling musician. Forget that. It just felt possible that you pursue the dream of being a working musician and making a living, spending your time with people, making music, and having that be the major thing that pulls your life together. And that sense of possibility was very beautifully represented, I think, in this documentary. I was just saying this documentary premiered in Toronto this past weekend, but it gets a wider release on Crave later this year. How do you think it's going to land with people who are like, I don't know anything about Broken Social Scene. This is going to be my introduction to this band. How do you think it'll land with them?
I think you touched on it right there. Aside from the band itself, this is really a snapshot of a time in a city, a creative, just magical time. And, I'm of an age that I can nostalgize that in a real way. And I don't want to look at it through rose-colored glasses per se. Yeah. But everything from, we are very aware of venues shutting down, of rehearsal space being really hard to come by, just the cost of living. Can you, it's interesting when I wrote an article for the Globe and Mail about this film, one of the things that Brendan Canning said to me is back in the day, you used to be able to string together 3 small-time jobs and still be able to make it as a musician. Can you do that now? Really hard,
Yeah.
So I think especially younger people watching this, there's going to be a bit of a really interesting angle for them into a time and a place that is very different. And I think what you really get out of Steven's film is that one of the things tying that time together was just community.
Yeah. Listen, I'm not a working musician. I'm not a musician at all. I do this for a living. And I found myself watching that film being like, I mourn this Toronto because that is certainly a more interesting version of the city than a city that is more interested in hey, how do we attract more, high net worth earners? That is infinitely less interesting than just having artists around who can survive, who can continue to do the work that they want to do and just create with people and not be able to make a glamorous living, just make a living.
Absolutely.
It was a really beautiful rendering.
Aside from Broken Social Scene, which is obviously the band we were talking about, there were so many other concentric circles of scenes.
Yeah.
Torontopia was a word that was used very often in that sort of
Well,
era.
I missed that boat, pal.
Yeah.
I was not there for that.
It was a time.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what to tell you.
Well, that time can be seen in this documentary. Tabassum, I really appreciate you coming in, friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. Tabassum Siddiqui is a freelance music and arts writer. Her review of the documentary, It's All Gonna Break, appears in the Globe and Mail. By the way, It's All Gonna Break will be streaming on Crave later this year. In the meantime, that is it for the show today. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. We'll be back tomorrow, so if you're around, I would love to see you then.